What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caparoso. Sunday, AM coffee. It's been a very busy few days of content, all the post-game reaction you need up and live to week one. I'm concluding my Sunday coffee series on the Jets roster by talking about their coaching staff for a few minutes here to kick off the week. Before we get into week two of the preseason, before I start talking about Bob Saleh and everybody else, I want to remind you guys that today's episode is brought to you by Magic Mind, which I'm on like week 6 of now. I've been having it every morning. A little mental performance shot. I still have it with coffee. Didn't have to cut coffee out. It's a nice little additive boost for it. 100% safe. Time release caffeine. Doctors have validated it. Over 200 scientific studies behind every ingredient, which you can find on the website. Mushrooms organically grown in the great state of California. Matcha at the highest possible grade. And nano encapsulation technology, which sounds so smart. You know it has to be good for you. It makes you feel smarter. Gives you a little more energy and more focus throughout the day. 100% carbon neutral. Every time you buy a bottle, 5 cents is donated to a mental health charity that helps U.S. homeless communities. So you're doing some good as well. No risk. You're confident. I'm confident that you're going to like it so much that they will refund 100%, no questions asked, for up to 100 days after buying. We have a limited time offer at Badlands that you can use now that gets you up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with code Badlands20. That's code Badlands20 at checkout. I'll also put the link in the bio. All right, let's talk coaching staff. I wrote about this a little this week in my 1 year to weekly column, and I was thinking about it just because there was a random tweet that popped up from Warren Sharp emphasizing how bad Zach Wilson is, that he's struggling to barely even make the Broncos roster. The Broncos, who might have the, weakest quarterback depth chart in the NFL. He can't get first team reps. And it was just a reminder that the Jets have won 7 games each of the past 2 years in spite of their quarterback situation. Not that it's great to be 7-10, but the Jets have effectively had the worst quarterback situation in the NFL themselves the past 2 years. So I think, like many Jet fans, you're skeptical of Saleh going into this year. He's 18-33. How much of that is his fault? How much of that is the quarterback fault? Part of what the issue is that if you look past the Zach Wilson games, he's lost a lot of those games as well, even though we had a couple nice Mike White moments. It's not like the Jets have like a great overall record when Zach Wilson didn't play the last 3 years. Now, I'm not saying Mike White, Joe Flacco, Boyle, and Trevor Siemian were murderer's row of quarterbacks, but there's not some like big shiny stat to point to that Saleh's like 7-1 when coaching any other quarterback besides Zach Wilson, right? Like the Jets, lost week 1 in 2022 with Flacco under center. They lost week 3 to the Bengals with Flacco under center. They lost the Boyle games last year. Mike White, after beating the Bears a couple of years ago, lost to the Bills and the Vikings, although he did get it knocked out of the Bills game. Flacco lost a game a few years back when he started against Miami. Mike White lost the game against Buffalo where he threw all the picks. So there's been struggles no matter what. And I do think fans, I've always kind of consistently said here, I think to date, Saleh's been probably like a C- or a D+, who's treated by fans like an F-, whereas Joe Douglas has been like a C+, maybe a C. Maybe that's even being generous with what his record really is and how long he's been here, and fans kind of treat him like an A. I think that's balanced out a little bit. Douglas certainly has more security than Saleh and has a couple more things to fall back on, although in certain instances, he's probably done a little more damage. Regardless, this is not a Joe Douglas podcast. This is a Robert Saleh podcast. And the question really is he capable of coaching a playoff team and a team that could win in the playoffs? And the answer is we don't really know yet. Historically, it's uncommon for a coach to start like 18-33 and all of a sudden turn it around and be a really good coach. Now, upgrading from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers is really unique. It's not something we see a lot of, going from a guy who's probably going to be out of the league soon to a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback who's one of the best players in the NFL over the past 10, 15 years. What version of Rodgers are they getting? How much of the offense is he really truly running? How does that change how Saleh handles game management and how aggressive or not aggressive he is? All that remains to be seen. We know Saleh can coach a defense. He's brought this defense from the worst in the NFL to one of the best in the NFL. The player development on that side of the football has been excellent. The staffing on that side of the football has been excellent. He's made the right decision to keep Brant Boyer, who's been a really good coordinator, and the Jets have done a good job going from kind of like a mess and a disaster on special teams at times when they had kicking issues to being consistently solid and capable. So he's made the right choice with that part of the coaching staff. Offensively, it's been a mess. And, I feel what happened is that he picked LaFleur. I think LaFleur had his ups and downs. I think most Jet fans would prefer they still have LaFleur right now compared to Hackett. He was forced to fire LaFleur. His decision after that to go with the Hackett-Downing combo, very debatable at best. I still think the Jets could have gotten Rodgers without Hackett. I think it was like a little nice to have. Maybe it helped 1%. I still think they ultimately could have got him. I think Rodgers came here because of the defense, because of Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson. Probably had, a good comfort level with Douglas and Saleh. I don't think the only reason he came here was because of Hackett. And Downing was another head-scratching hire. Same with Keith Carter. And by all reports, Saleh's been very stubborn about hanging on to those guys. Probably going back to the fact that he was forced to fire the offensive coordinator that he really wanted, who was immediately picked up by the Rams and seems to be doing just fine with Sean McVay. And I would still bet as a head coach at some point down the road. So the offensive coaching decisions have been questionable. The game management's been questionable. He periodically says things in press conferences that make Jet situations more complicated than they need to be. There's also just been a consistent issue of this team, not feeling like they're ready to play certain weeks in games, especially in games that have had stakes attached to them over the last 2 years, and a lot of penalties, dumb, repeatable penalties over and over again with accountability that takes a little too long to implement. So those things can't all be attributed to the quarterback. I don't think Saleh's a lost cause, but I think it's fair to be very skeptical of him going into this year. I think the Jets have enough talent on their roster, and if Rodgers is healthy, a good enough quarterback where they really should win 10 or 11 games. And if they do that, Saleh gets, some of that credit, right? He can't just be well, anyone could have coached them to win 10 or 11 games. It doesn't really work like that, right? You're game planning every week. You're keeping everyone together. You're leading the team. He gets credit if they get to 10 or 11 wins. The question is going to be, all right, you win 11 games. You're hosting a home playoff game. Are you able to put together a game plan that could win a playoff game? And can you beat Mike McDaniel, who's coached circles around the Jets? Can you beat Shanahan week one, who's going to know your scheme in and out? What if you're coaching against the Chiefs in the second round? How prepared do you look or not look? These are first world problems if we're talking about that. I'm fascinated to see how the Jets look week one. It's going to be a really interesting test for their coaching staff because they're going against a great staff that's going to kind of know their scheme inside and out. Are the Jets going to show up ready to play in prime time, or are they going to get hit by a buzzsaw by the best team in the NFC? Will be a good early barometer for them. And Saleh does not have a lot of wiggle room, right? Woody Johnson is not a big in-season firing guy. But in this year, if the Jets start 2-4 or 2-5, I could absolutely see them firing Saleh, handing it to Ulbrich, and just keeping it moving. He has no wiggle room. He is on a very hot seat. He needs to have a winning record and make the playoffs this year. I think he won't be back. I think Joe Douglas can get away with 9-8 and narrowly missing the playoffs, or 8-9 and get another chance. I think he's only gone if they go 5-12 or something, and the Jets just go full clean slate. Saleh can't. Saleh needs to really make the playoffs, or he's not going to be here, and he's probably going to revert back to being an defensive coordinator somewhere. So I'm more concerned about Hackett and how the play calling works down in the red zone than the day-to-day of Saleh. But Saleh's a fair concern, right? We just don't know yet. There's been a couple positive moments, right? The Jets beating the Eagles last year with Tay Hayes and Craig James at cornerback and Zach Wilson at quarterback. Really impressive. The Jets should have beat the Chiefs last year with Zach Wilson at quarterback. They kind of got screwed by the refs, and I don't like to blame losses on the refs. That game's a rare exception. But they kind of ran out of steam after that. They weren't ready to play in that Giants game. They lucked into a win, and then the bottom fell out. They weren't ready for their primetime games, and those were winnable games against the Chargers and Raiders last year. And So you see the highs of the Eagles game. You see the highs of keeping it together after Rodgers' injury and still winning that Bills game week 1, and how they able to beat the Bills 2 years ago, even at home. And then you see God, they had a chance to still be alive for the playoffs in that Seattle game a few years ago. And the players admitted after the game they weren't ready and they weren't up for it. It's how does that happen? There was a little sign of life last year after they beat Houston and they sleepwalk into that Miami game and get buzzsawed. So it's a big lingering question mark. But if Saleh can just be a C+, B- this year, and Rodgers is healthy and there's no other crazy injury, this will be a 10 or 11 win team. And when you get into the tournament, anything can happen. You get hot, you get the right matchup, the right injury luck, the right break, you can make some noise. So I wouldn't write off the Jets' chances or the Jets' season because of Robert Saleh, who's got a lot of wood to chop to get back to 500. The Jets could go 11-6 this year, and he'll still be 29-39 as a head coach. It's going to take some years to undo that 18-33 record. Rodgers will help, especially if he has him for 2 years. But let's see how that plays out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll have a full week of content. Other guys, Monday, War Room, Tuesday, podcast, Wednesday, other podcasts, some kind of drop coming Thursday, Buck the Trend Friday, TOJ Talks Saturday, and or an immediate reaction to the Jets' second preseason game. And then we'll be right back here next Sunday doing the exact same thing, moving on to a different part of this series. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will talk to you soon.